welcome to the World Teleport Association webinar on fundamentals of cybersecurity for teleport operators. My name is Robert Bell. I'm the Executive Director of World Teleport Association, and I'll be your moderator for the next hour. WTA is a nonprofit trade association that advocates for the commercial interests of teleport operators. It also promotes excellence in operations, in technology, and business practices for those same companies. Our goal is to help members deliver the highest quality service and to meet their goals for revenue and profitability growth. So in addition to programs like this one, we conduct and publish research on a wide range of topics. This includes our annual satellite operator benchmark study, where teleport operators rate the commercial and technical performance of their satellite operator vendors, as well as best practice reports on everything from valuation to strategies for competing in a gigabit world. WTA's membership includes more than 140 teleport operators, satellite carriers, and technology providers in 46 nations. And they're a vital market channel, I should say, for satellite and fiber carriers, and a major market for transmission, for information technology, and storage technology. And our members include teleport operators large and small around the world, as well as the best known names in satellite and in technology. We're very grateful for their continuing support of our mission since 1985. So, a few housekeeping details for today. All attendees will be in listen-only mode, but we do want to include your questions, your comments, and your ideas in our discussion. So I draw your attention to the Questions tab in your control panel. You can open that up and type in a question, and it will appear on my screen, and I will then be able to include your ideas and your questions in the Q&A section at the end. Following the webinar, a recording and a copy of the presentation will be made available to you. And if you should need any technical support during the webinar, please jot down the appropriate number that's there on your screen, and somebody will help you. I'm pleased to say we have not yet ever had one of those technical problems, but the day is young. Following my introduction, you'll be hearing from two highly experienced cybersecurity experts who work every day with satellite, teleport, data center, and enterprise customers. This will be followed by a Q&A session, and that's where I'll be counting on you to ask what's on your mind. Today, you do not have to look very far for dramatic news on cyber threats and cyber attacks. Once upon a time, hackers were the juvenile delinquents of the internet, showing off their skills by going where they just weren't supposed to go. They were Matthew Broderick in the movie War Games, if your memory stretches back that far, breaking into the school's system to give himself better grades and accidentally almost causing global thermonuclear war. Today, hackers are much more intentional. They work to destabilize elections, to take down infrastructure, and most of all, to make money by either holding us to ransom or selling our data. And the scary part about today is that there is literally no place to hide, because these hackers use advanced automated tools to scan the entire web for vulnerabilities, and they attack where they see an opportunity. So being small and out of the way just doesn't cut it anymore. So that is the world that we are going to explore today, with the specific challenges of communications and media service providers in mind. In addition to this webinar, I recommend to you WTA's 2015 report, Cybersecurity for Teleport and Satellite Operators. It's based on interviews with operational executives across our industry, and it's available free to WTA members and for sale to non-members from our website at worldteleport.org. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. They are Peggy Rowe, Vice President for Software and Cyber Solutions, and John Chesser, who is Director of Cybersecurity Solutions, both for WTA's member company DataPath, Inc. Peggy and John, welcome to the webinar, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. All right.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. I am Peggy Rowe. As Robert introduced me, I am the Vice President of Software and Cybersecurity Solutions at DataPath. a provider of communication solutions, satellite terminals, and associated equipment.
I'm John Chesser. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Solutions here at DataPath, and I manage our CSOC and our team of cyber professionals that are out there every day on the battlefield fighting cybersecurity issues, whether it's in all ranges of industry, from telecom industries to the professional services organizations that are out there today. Going to start out with two very common pieces that everyone has seen: fixed satellite, a fixed antenna system, and a mobile antenna system here. One of the things I want to call out is that on the mobile setup there, that could be at any sporting event or live event that's going on. And one of the key things that you see in this picture is that you see a lot of physical security here. Fences and checks to make sure that people can't just simply walk up to one of these antennas and do something, some sort of harm to them from a physical standpoint. But what you don't see is, are there really been the means put in place to protect it from the digital world? How many times have you seen it where someone has a better internet connection than someone else, or their internet connection is just not working right, and they say, hey, can you give me your password to your Wi-Fi so that I can work off of that? And you have to really think before you do that, because do you know that that machine that's attaching to it is safe and secure? Some things that have been in the news recently, and this one happens to come out of the Hacker News, is an incident that happened in Dallas, Texas, here in the United States, where hackers took advantage of a vulnerability of the emergency siren system in Dallas and went in through this vulnerability and set off 150 emergency sirens across Dallas. It just so happened it was a week that Dallas had actually had some inclement weather, and so a lot of people were unsure whether this was a real event or not. Turns out, since the alarms and the sirens went off for almost 2 hours, it definitely was not. The interesting part to this scenario is that they ended up having to actually call the OEM manufacturer to be able to get the instructions on how to turn the sirens back off. The hackers had really taken advantage of that. In this case, a further danger that happened here is that the emergency system, the 911 system, was flooded with phone calls to the point that someone that had a real emergency potentially could not have gotten in to make a phone call. So this is a great example of some of the issues that are going on. Now, whether this was someone that was doing it intentionally or whether or not it was someone who was just playing around, that's to be determined.
The statistics presented here call out that we are in an unprecedented era of an explosive technological change combined with increased regulatory scrutiny. Couple that with current stats that report, for instance, that in 2016 we experienced, as you see here, a 6,000% rise in ransomware growth in ransomware attacks. The average cost of a breach, as you see there, is $4 million. The dollars are getting bigger and bigger every year. And in this article that is noted there, the respondents, when asked if we are living in a riskier world, 72% of them agreed yes, resoundingly. And this was a survey of CFOs and CEOs.
One of the things that we're seeing in real time for us within our own operations here is that we're finding customers on a regular basis are finally realizing that it's not if, it's when an attack is going to happen. We have just recently worked with a customer that a simple thing of an employee who had been out remotely working for a few weeks, comes back to the office, plugged in their machine. They had done all the right things, but the cyber criminals were still able to get past their defenses there. And with this, the ransomware ran rampant through their network. This one incident, they still are digging out from the issues that have happened here. But just to give you an example, they said for every machine that was encrypted with the ransomware, the cyber criminals wanted $1.50 bitcoins, which bitcoins were trading on that day at about 4,500 US dollars to a bitcoin, or they wanted 3,000 bitcoins in order to unencrypt everything that they had. That's a large amount of money in order for them to recover. They were able to do a lot of that work recovery through backups and through plans that they put in place, but there's going to be a large amount of money that's going to cost them to do that. Early detection is a key. They didn't see it till it was already too late, until somebody went to open a file. And so making sure that you put the right things in place to detect a breach is a key.
We're finding board of directors are requiring report outs from their staff on the cyber posture of their companies, and many companies are appointing chief risk officers or other similar roles within their organization just to manage risk, and in particular as associated with cybersecurity. So there are promising trends amongst the professional associations in increasing education and awareness amongst their members. And what we're showing you here are obviously WTA, and we appreciate the support today on this webinar, and the article that Robert mentioned. The NAB hosts on their site a list of articles across the world that reference hacks particular to broadcast industry. Then, of course, the GVF Global VSAT Forum has created a cybersecurity task force, as well as some specifications and baselines for securing VSATs.
One of the things I think that you've really got to realize here, and especially with what the National Association of Broadcasters is doing, is that you can see it's happening on a regular basis, these attacks. And it's not just one item that the cyber criminals are going after. They're doing all kinds of different things. They're using whatever exploit that they can find in a organization setup to go after them. And in some cases, they're simply making changes to websites. In some cases, they're actually taking equipment down. In some cases, they are taking over. In one case, where a radio station was taken over and actually playing songs that out there across and broadcasting it out there to the airways that was not very friendly to a particular organization. So you've got to be on your toes, and you've got to be watching for this, and you've got to make sure that you put the right protections together at all levels, and that you're looking to cover everything. The day of simply saying I placed antivirus out there, or I put a firewall on the edge of my network and set it to the defaults are over. There's a lot more that must be done in order to protect yourself.
We are well aware of the unique challenges in the SATCOM industry. We build resilient satellites, communications equipment, and networks, and they stay in service for many, many years. We employ many techniques for encrypting and obfuscating transmission paths, but as we touched on a few moments ago, we're facing unprecedented technology changes. With something like 7.5 billion people in the world, there's about that many IoT or Internet of Things devices connected to the Internet. And the stats say that there could be up to 20 billion connected within a few years, and that's really a conservative estimate. I think when we look at our own homes and start thinking about just all the gadgets we've added, and we all have phones and tablets and computers and smart thermostats and so on and so forth. There's so many now entry points into our networks. And of course, we have begun to fully IP enable our satellite communications networks. So that increases the attack surface.
Yeah, one time, equipment within the satellite industry was only interconnected through a serial connection, and today everything is coming with a Ethernet connection, and we're taking advantage of those connections and plugging it in, and so the cyber criminals understand that they can get through there so much easier when it comes to that connection through an Ethernet. Also, devices today are coming also with USB connections on them for either updates or whether it's firmware or patching or something for that. There's another entry point. Admittedly, it means you've got to physically get to the equipment, but you still have those threats of someone inadvertently plugging in a USB that has an infection on it. The numbers today say that somewhere around 80% of the USBs produced today have some sort of flaw on them or malware, and so you have to be concerned about that.
And I know in our business that it's oftentimes the most innocent of intentions that occur. For instance, it's that SATCOM technician that walks up to a ground station, connects their laptop to test something or update the firmware, and they've now unknowingly introduced some malware into a computer that was embedded within that terminal or ground station equipment or data center rack of equipment. And all of a sudden, the human element now completely unintentionally has infected an entire communications network potentially. So it's really something we have to do to educate everyone. It's important that everyone, both internal corporate staff as separate from our operational networks, that everyone across the board is aware of the risk here. Oftentimes we're walking up with a laptop that is connected to our corporate network because it's connected wirelessly, and maybe you don't even think about it. Oftentimes you don't look to see what is my current internet connection status, and you walk up to your operational side of your network, and now you've allowed malware to jump from one to the next. So there's so many different industry partners that make up a complete end-to-end network that is delivered ultimately to a customer, and it's all of us together working together to secure our piece of the puzzle that allows us to increase and do better with our security posture. That being said, the risk remains. The risk is always changing. The criminals are getting smarter. There's always something new for us to learn and do better with.
And that brings up in all industries, everyone talks about the insider threat, and it's not always malicious. It's not the person was intentionally trying to do something, but that accidental piece. And so education is a key, and so many of the frameworks and compliance regulations that are out there today talk about that you must do continual education on cybersecurity in order to keep yourselves protected. So one of the key pieces when it comes to cybersecurity and SATCOM is that there's become this blend now of satellite and the terrestrial IP networks, and they constantly are interconnecting, and so we must put in the new protections and barriers in there to be able to protect the equipment on both sides and the software and everything that is running out there. The cyber criminals, as Robert talked about in his introduction, are constantly using tools out there, and a lot of them are automated in order to come up and find those vulnerabilities. And they're willing to, just like in the old days when people would try to do scams through phones, and they would simply dial every phone number out there. The cyber criminals are doing the same thing when it comes to IP addresses. They're looking at every IP address. They're scanning every IP address. And that's a big part of what we see in our Security Operations Center every day, is the fact that you'll see one server that's out there that somebody has stood up, and they're simply going out there, and we'll see them hit one customer in the morning, and then it's later in the afternoon they're coming after that second customer. And so making sure that you're doing your due diligence to protect that. And part of that is making sure that you put in and develop a cybersecurity plan, and some frameworks that are out there that have come out of a study, the Communication Security Reliability and Interoperability Council study. They talk about the NIST framework, which is very popular here in the U.S., or the CIS critical security controls, which either one of those could be used anywhere. There are many other ones out there that can be used, whether it's ISO 2700, whether it's looking at the EU cybersecurity strategy and their frameworks that are out there. But making sure that you build your plans on those frameworks and that you cover all the categories that are out there. We're already seeing today where our customers that we work with are coming up and saying, we've got our customer is saying, we need a proof of what we're doing when it comes to cybersecurity. We need to be able to show that we have cybersecurity in place. We've had those assessments and that we're doing all the right things. Give us a copy of our cybersecurity plan that we have. And so it's going to come to that point that a company that has already jumped out ahead and done put in place those cybersecurity initiatives are going to have that competitive advantage in the market. And so everybody must put cybersecurity planning on their roadmap, and they need to do it sooner than later.
I think it's worth pointing out here, John, reminding the audience of what happened with the Target chain of stores. It was an HVAC vendor whose system was connected to the internet that ultimately was the root cause of the breach that occurred with Target. And so part of what you're going to see in the framework is really reminding you to look at your entire supply chain, to really know, as we said, everything that is attached to your network.
That's right. So as we talk about the framework, and so here's an example of the top 20 critical security controls that are out there that comes out of the CIS critical security controls. And you know, if you look at I know at first when you look at this, it looks very daunting, but it's all about the fact of looking at everything that's out there, from what is your inventory of all your devices, as Peggy was talking about earlier. You know, there are lots of things that get installed and they stay, especially in the SATCOM industry, they stay running for many, many years, of making sure you know what those devices are and that you're doing a regular vulnerability assessment on it and updating them so that they're not vulnerable as you make changes to your network, that you have defenses in place there to stop malware from infecting devices. So many devices today have embedded computers, whether it's a Linux kernel or something, and those are very vulnerable. To looking at what is your wireless connection methodologies. Do you have IoT devices connecting to those wireless networks, and are they properly covered when it comes to cybersecurity? To making sure that, you know, when those updates come out for applications, that they're applied, because in lots of cases today, the application updates that are arriving are about providing security. You know, those zero-day attacks, as they talk about, where the exploit is published out there to the world, of making sure that when the vendor sends you that update for that application, that you take the time to do it, to making sure that you have a response plan. We all put together contingency plans that if this piece of equipment goes down, that we have a backup piece of equipment. Well, we need to also have a contingency plan that if a cyber incident happens, that we know what our response path is, and that everybody from management to the person, you know, working out there in operations understands what is the path we're going to take to bring ourselves back online.
Your staff has identified a breach. Do you know who has the authority to pull the plug on the internet? Because that is really important to know who has that authority, because that's a big deal, right? You're shutting down your entire business at that point, but you may have saved yourselves from utter ruin, right? So these things are important to know how you're going to respond, and it needs to be in writing so that roles and responsibilities are clear. So where do we start? I think we introduced the idea that we need to identify all the assets on the network. As they say, the first step of recovery is knowing that you have a problem. And seriously, though, we need to go through, identify everything authorized or unauthorized attached to your network, and keep that inventory continuously updated.
And once you've got that inventory in place, you've then got to design a method for protecting that equipment. And so that means that you've identified this equipment, that you know what the vulnerabilities are on the equipment, and you know the vulnerabilities of how it's attached, and then you can put together your methodology for protection. Another big thing to look at when it comes to that is detecting those incidents. And that incident could be coming from the lower end of the network of a device attached to the network, all the way to, you know, some of your gateway facilities that are out there. And so making sure that you're looking at all levels of your network for detection of a potential threat or incident happening.
We talked about oftentimes it's a collection of providers who have come together to deliver an end-to-end communication system to the end customer. And in that scenario, it's very important to know where the demarcation is, where the delineation is for your responsibilities in terms of securing that end product.
And then, as we've talked about before, a response plan, making sure that everybody knows, and especially if you're working with multiple vendors or multiple sections within the network in there, of knowing what that response plan is and how they work together, and ultimately who has the authority to make those decisions. And that is one of the biggest things that we see in working incident responses when it comes to cybersecurity, is finding that one person that can make the decision and is willing to listen to the facts and do that hard thing sometimes in order to make sure that you're protected ultimately.
There are really tough decisions that have to be made when all of a sudden every computer in your facility has a note from a hacker that says,
pay up.
Pay up. Please contact the following help center to get in touch with how you can transmit those bitcoins over to get all of your data back. And I always like to remind people, it's not just the fact that they encrypted your data, and let's say you're perfectly willing to pay the ransom, and you pay the ransom and get your data back. It's a long, tedious process to unencrypt and get your entire network up and running again. We've seen it, we've lived it. It's no matter what your decision is to pay or not pay, it's just not something you want to go through.
We had a customer that we worked with that they decided to pay the ransom, and even after paying the ransom, it was more than 18 days before they got all of their operations back, simply by the fact that they would have to unencrypt some files, stop, deliver it so they could continue to do business, and then start it back up again. And some stuff just didn't work with the encryption key like it was supposed to. So this is my statement that I make all the time to people, that security is not a technology problem, it's a resource problem. So one of the things that we are facing in the industry today is that unemployment when it comes to cybersecurity is zero. It's 0%. If you are in cybersecurity, they are recruiting people in their senior year of college at very big bucks to immediately, so they graduate and they go right to work. Cybersecurity has this issue with not having enough people to provide it out there, to provide the services. The technology is there to, number one, to provide early detection of an incident. The technology is there to actually put up the defenses, and in some cases even the offensive mode to protect your network. The technology is available to cover no matter where you are and what industry you're in. The key is finding the resources to be able to run that technology and to actually provide those services to you. So that's a one thing that everybody needs to think about as you're putting together your plans of making sure that you pick the right tools and that you have your resource planning put together. There definitely is a big difference between an IT person, a person that that would be an operator, and a cybersecurity person.
And we find that people often become quickly overrun with alerts and so on from the technology tools that they do choose to put in their network. So there's really a lot of trade-offs in looking at the solution that you're going to choose for your business. If you're going to buy all the latest, greatest tools, whatever that is, it's always changing, right? You need to make sure you have the staff 24/7, right? Because the hackers are around the world and available any time of day to do their deeds. You need to make sure that that staff is capable of responding to the information, not just capable, but has the bandwidth, and you have 24/7 coverage to respond to any kind of information they're receiving. Because oftentimes it is a matter of seconds, really, right, that you need to respond to an attack.
Yes. So here is I found this not too long ago, a cartoon, and it talks about the future war stories, and I can tell you that I definitely feel this on a regular basis. As we were talking about, our resources, it seems like every holiday weekend comes along, we have another customer that's has an incident that we have to respond to. And so this is my little funny. There I was, stuck in a Chinese firewall, when suddenly our router lit up like the 4th of July, bots to the left of me, Trojans to the right. We lost some good servers that day. So that's really the way I feel some days when we are out there trying to save a company's assets. Some questions that we want to pose to you to consider. Do you have a fully fleshed security plan in place? And is it written, and have you tested it? And that's a big key, is that a written plan that hasn't gone through a test is just a document. And so you really got to take that time to test it. Who is your risk manager? Do you have a risk manager? If you don't, who assumes that in your organization? How often is your senior management board briefed on what's going on and when it comes to cybersecurity? I can tell you once a year, once a quarter is not enough. They really need to be aware of everything that's going on. It's very interesting. We find lots of times when we produce our monthly reports for our customers, and they actually see the number of tickets that have come in a month, they're really surprised. And when you start sharing that with the senior management, they're even more surprised. Do you have trained and certified security experts? Do they have those accreditations and and know how to put those to work there? Who is the backup on your cybersecurity solutions? And so one of that is not only personnel, but technology and resources that you need to protect yourself. It needs to be, cybersecurity needs to be treated just like it would for anything else that you put out there in your network. If you would put a backup router out there, you know, in order to protect it, you need to put out the same backup cybersecurity pieces. And are you using the latest next generations of firewalls and incident protection systems? Do you have the DNS pieces in place in there to stop those DDoS attacks? And are you using advanced threat detection on the endpoints? And so much of this comes in through email. Somebody clicks a link or receives a file and opens it up, and then it spreads throughout the network. Have you made sure that you've segmented and protected yourself? And one of the questions that we always like to have people think about is that you really got to think about how much of it do you insource, how much of it do you use your existing staff, do you have dedicated staff, and overall, the one that I always like people to think about, cybersecurity has to be a 24/7 operation because the bad guys never sleep.
At this point, I know that Robert has been collecting questions, and we are now ready to entertain those.
Okay, well, we're ready. We hope to be entertaining as well.
Right.
Listening to your presentation, I was reminded of a personal story. Fortunately, not a bad one, but my son-in-law is a software engineer, and once while screwing around with something, he set up a server online and got it an IP address. And he said it only took 20 minutes for the first probe from China to hit him. So 20 minutes from the time he activated the IP address and had an online presence, he was already being scanned. It was just, that's when I began really to understand just how serious this issue is. I'm going to start actually with a question. One of the questions that's come in from our audience, because it's a nice specific one, somebody looking for some advice. The question is, when, where, or how can a small business, because of course the challenge is always that for a giant corporation this stuff is, the expense is onerous but bearable, but for a small company it can be quite an issue. So where can a small business obtain or buy an initial Microsoft Word template for a business continuity disaster prep plan? In other words, basically, is there something out there that people can grab and start using it to build their plan?
Yes.
Yeah, so there definitely are lots of templates out there and tools for putting together those plans. One of the keys is to make sure that you're following one of the accepted frameworks and that it's going to fit into those frameworks out there. One of the things that I find is make sure that they're following that, you know, whether it's ISO 2700, whether it's NIST, whether it's the computer controls. You definitely can find a lot of vendors out there that offer those types of tools for the frameworks. Make sure that it covers that piece. And definitely there are groups out there that can also assist you in doing that, DataPath being one of them also.
Well, of course. Let's not forget that. Of course, as DataPath, you would always advise people to use a third-party managed security service provider. And certainly I can recommend DataPath as being an exceptional company. I want to step up to the sort of high altitude for a minute because you gave us a lot of great detail. But I want to sort of frame it for people. Could you show us the 18 points coming out of that CSI set of recommendations, and it's very cool. Yeah, thank you. But let's step back from that for a moment and talk about what are sort of the key areas of a good security posture. How do you architect it in terms of you know, people issues, technology issues, management of the network issues?
I think we want to start with all these control areas and first document what you have in place. And then you select the area. You need to understand the risk profile of your business model. So what areas are most impactful to your ability to conduct business, to continue your revenue stream. And I know in the introduction to this webinar, you had mentioned, Robert, SLAs, service level agreements. And absolutely, we are now talking in most agreements financial impact of not being able to meet availability numbers. And so once you sort of frame this within the context of what is my business model and what's going to hurt my bottom line, you then start to go through all the control items and figure out how to prioritize the areas to attack in terms of securing and improving your posture.
Peggy, I think that's great advice. I mean, focusing on the things that are going to burn you the worst. Once you understand what the landscape is, what all the connected devices are, then focusing on the things that are going to hurt you the most is always smart. Because this is hardly an academic exercise. That really reminds me of another question that has come up here. Where is it? Come on. Oh yeah, that is. So you sort of referenced in your presentation that there's a mix of, let's call them defensive measures, things you can put in place that are static. I mean, they're not really static; they're always working. But there's stuff you put into place and you maintain, versus offensive or proactive approaches. Could you talk more about the difference between those and how sort of the role of each of them in a security posture?
Sure. One of the key things is when you look at defensive things that you want to put in place, number one are those protection measures that, as you said, they're not static, they're definitely dynamic, that you're going to want to put in. So a good example is there every day there is a list that comes out that's updated. That's one list that collects everything from the previous day of potential threat websites or potential threat IP addresses. They're updated every 30 minutes to the latest information that is provided from companies like ourselves and other managed service security service providers that we put out there of what we've seen, of making sure that you've got that equipment. That's the intrusion protection systems that are out there that are going to actually do reactive type of items. So they see that intrusion starting to happen, whether it's coming from it, and they're going to react. And that could be block that IP address or block that traffic, or it could be point them towards a honeypot, which is a more of an offensive way where we're going to watch what the attackers are trying to do and collect that information so that we can use that behavior, really what people are calling artificial intelligence today, to make sure that we have our defenses in place for the future. The key is that of making sure that, number one, you use defensive depth, and it's a layer effect. So the outside part of the network is one set of pieces where you're going to have a combination of offensive and defensive type of roles, but you're also going to have that on the next layer in of your network and all the way into your internal piece. Because in lots of cases, when it comes to that, you've got to make sure that you're also watching and doing intrusion detection on the inside, because so much of what happens today is an insider threat. It's coming from the fact that I plugged a USB into my computer to copy the files that I got from maybe a vendor, and unbeknownst to that vendor, they had malware, and it's now trying to come into my network. That I'm watching that, and I'm doing the defensive parts of that. At the same time, you've got to have those pieces to say that that you're looking at everything that's coming in and determining, do I accept it or do I not accept it? Offensive pieces, the biggest things today is collecting that data in a honeypot so that you can use it for your artificial or behavior type of analysis information.
Another question from our listeners. Do you see the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the various penalties associated with it? Are those acting, do you think, as a greater imperative for teleport operators to make sure they're on top of this issue of security? And if so, are there other things like it that people in our industry should be aware of?
So yeah, I think that with the fact that the European Union has gone to the extreme of actually putting penalties onto issues that happen when it comes to cybersecurity is gonna really cause the all industries to wake up and see that. I see that when it comes to here in the United States, there's discussions that are going on now based on that the same things are going to happen, and that NIST is going to be the model for that, and that there possibly be regulations on that. The key is that people have got to wake up and start doing things, and I think that the fact that it's now become a financial problem there, that you're going to a fine is going to be in place because you not met that, is going to cause people to actually do things and react differently. I'm finding also that we're seeing with our customers that more and more of them are finding that there are financial ramifications if a cybersecurity incident happens if they've signed a contract with a customer. So if you were the third party that caused an incident to them, they're now causing requesting money back from that customer.
So would it be correct to say that there really, as of yet, there are really no, if you will, standards in this area, but between things like the data protection regulation, NIST, CIS, you're beginning to get frameworks which may in the future become standards?
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. That would make sense. This is it's funny what an old story this is, right? I mean, I remember very clearly. You can see with problem after problem, until it actually starts to cost us a lot of money, we don't solve it. And then, strangely enough, when it does start to cost us a lot of money, we figure out that we might want to tackle it. So there's a couple of interesting things you put out there. You gave two examples of something that just scared the pants off me, but I know this is something we deal with every day. An employee doing their job plugs into the network, and because they've been on remote work for 3 weeks, they picked up some malware, and boom, you're suddenly in trouble. Or that hardworking technician somewhere plugs his or her laptop into the rack, and you're in trouble. In a world where the threats are evolving so fast, what's the right way to think about that problem? Because they may be bringing something in you've never seen before. What kind of advanced steps should we be putting into place in a network to deal with that particular, terribly innocent but horrible threat?
So number one is education. So employees must be educated as to what are the threats that are coming down the line. So a good example here for us, I send out to our own internal once a week information about what are the latest threat that's happening and what we expect to be coming down the road. Number two is early detection. You must have the means for a machine, whether it's on the network or whether it's out remote, that you are detecting what is happening on that machine in real time. And that is a key to it. And the means are out there, the tools are out there for you to do that. And so I want to once again say that, go back to my statement about it's not a technology problem, it's a resource problem. The tools are out there. The key is to have somebody who's actually reviewing it and taking action on it. So for, if you see a problem, people need to have the authority. An example, we have a system that we use where our technicians in the actual security operations center have the authority to hit the button to stop someone's machine from communicating with the internet or the network, so that we can protect that machine and protect the rest of the environment.
One of the most common threats are phishing emails, and so emails are spoofed to look like they come from maybe your coworker or such, and this is very, very common. And just educating your employees on how to identify bad email, and I'm sure it's a daily occurrence and we don't even hear about it just in our organization, but the emails come across and they look very real, and they're asking for somebody in finance to make a bank transaction, or they're asking someone in HR to submit the entire list of employees with all of their personally identifiable information, to include salary, Social Security, that sort of thing. And it's so easy for smart people to get fooled. And so what is really key is to put an education system in place that helps people learn about these phishing emails. And the industry has really adapted in quite a, I guess, current teaching kind of way. There are systems that will send out test phishing emails just to see if an individual will fall for it. And if they do, it will adapt the learning modules so that they receive an increasing number of emails to practice on, so they learn how to identify a bad email. But I think when it comes down to it, we talk about all these really advanced technology ways to protect our networks, and it ends up being the simplest things again, like bad emails, like a virus you picked up because you plugged the USB in that you found on the ground at a conference.
Yeah, and so as we talk about that, one of the areas that we do our assessments, and part of our assessments when we do penetration testing is to do what we call drop the rubber ducky, and it's a USB drive that we will just drop in a company in an open space, and on there it has a, if you plug it into your machine, it has a little program that it loads onto your machine that we can identify and basically check mark that you did it. You'll be surprised how many people will just pick up a rogue USB drive that's laying in the break room or in the open area that everybody frequents as an employee, and then will take it back to their desk and plug it right into their machine. And they're usually doing it, it's very innocent. They're trying to see what files are on it to hope they can determine who it belongs to so they can return it.
That's very interesting. I mean, I Peggy, you're thinking about the internal phishing campaign put on by your IT department. I just came across that last week, and I was delighted by it because I thought, what a great adaptation. Just give me a chance to practice the skill. The other thing that I got from talking to an IT manager, which again really drives home the point you made, that it's about the people. It's about the well-intentioned people, smart, well-intentioned people doing things that turn out to be really bad. One of the things that I think is really effective and is not mentioned often enough is to give the people in your organization permission to say, hey, I just clicked on something, right? In other words, in that second, to alert IT saying, I just clicked on something I think it might be phishing, and not feel they're going to be punished, not feel they're going to be singled out, but instead that they're doing their job.
That is really key, you're right, because this really is all about us communicating with each other and collaborating on the kinds of things that are going on in our network, because knowing is the only way that we can stop the bad guys. Yeah.
Can only do it together. Now we're dealing, in this world we're dealing with companies that of course have their own networks and they do their own, they have their own businesses they run on these networks, but also, and probably most critically to them, they are managing somebody else's content, be it, a television program or a film. They are managing somebody else's data of extreme value and are being trusted with it. In those circumstances, what are some of the particular vulnerabilities or the priorities that service providers should be aware of in protecting their customers?
So one of the keys that is we talk about their protecting their customers' information is making sure, number one, that just as that number one, data is segmented like it's supposed to. If you've got data at rest, that data at rest is safe and secure, that there's no other, if there any movement of data in and out of there, that number one, it's scanned properly to make sure that it's not infected. I mean, you can encrypt a file and determine that the file is encrypted, but if the malware is already piggybacked onto the packet, you're still going to transmit it in that fashion. Make sure that, once again, that you're following all the proper controls as data moves and flows in there, that there's no other means for it to have anything else interjected into it, that you're regularly scanning any place that data sits for any errors, anything that's going to happen there.
And the broadcast multimedia example is very interesting and one we've dealt with. As John said, you may encrypt that data from point to point, but now that media file that's going to be broadcast over the air drops into the editing room. So it's been unencrypted, it's now edited, and now we have a point at which something could be inserted into that file. So, we talk about a lot of different techniques beyond watermarking to identify, is that file the same file that started out at the other end of the world where the cameraman captured the media and now it's traversed across the world ultimately to this editing room? Is it the same file, or was something interjected along that transmission path that was not intended?
And the other thing is that, especially in dealing with broadcasters, we've learned that in a lot of cases the personnel aren't all within the same network. Lots of cases they're independent producers of content, and they're working on their own systems, and so to make sure that the initial file that comes in, is it clean and safe and secure to go into your system where the data would sit at rest.
Yeah, very, very good points. We could keep going. I've certainly got some more questions to share with you folks, but I'm going to have to call time at this point because we are getting to the end. And come on, there you go. So I want to thank you, Peggy. I want to thank you, John, for sharing your insights with us in a very interesting hour. My thanks to all of you who've attended it today. Please look for an email from us that provides links to the webinar recording and presentations, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.